welcome back to today's devotion. I'm glad you could join me. This week we are talking and we are getting our text from First Corinthians chapter 5. So in chapter 5, starting in verse 9, it says this: I wrote you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with those immoral people of this world, or the covetous, or the swindlers, or the idolaters, for then you would have had to go out of the world. So this is what's going on. Paul comes into Corinth. There's a lot of immorality, so he begins to teach against immorality. And in fact, when we get our letters, we see that the immorality had crept back into the churches, so he's addressing it. But there's something really important to note here. He says this. He says, I told you, in his letter, right? He says, I told you not to associate with immoral people. I told you not to associate with people who are covetous, right? And who are thieves, who are swindlers. And he kind of goes through this whole list, but then he makes a line in the sand, right? He says, listen, but I'm not telling you not to talk and not to have conversation and relationship with people outside the church that are like this. I'm telling you not to have relationship with people within the church. He says, listen, if we start telling everybody outside the church, or we start not hanging out with them and not talking to anybody outside the church, he said, then listen, we would have to come out of the world completely. So this is what Paul's saying. He's saying, listen, it's those in the church that need to be held accountable to Christian values. We shouldn't be kind of forcing and criticizing people outside the church that don't hold the same values as us. That's kind of what he's saying here. And the reason is this, is because criticism will kill just about every relationship. And so how are we as the church ever going to show this world the love of Jesus if all we ever do is criticize them, right? If we're always telling them everything they're doing wrong or how immoral they are, right? And we're criticizing everything about them. Paul says, listen, we can't be doing that with those outside the church. God will judge them. God will judge them for their actions. That's not our job. It's not our job to kind of hold them accountable for their actions, right? So here's the deal. We have a name for this when a church tells its congregants that they shouldn't be friends with people outside the church, and they shouldn't have any kind of relationship at all with people outside the church. We call that a cult, right? And so whenever you are part of a church or hear of a church that is telling its congregants and telling the people, listen, do not make friends with people who do not go to church. Well, that's a cult. We don't teach that, and that's not what Paul taught. Paul taught something much different, and we're going to kind of get into that a little bit tomorrow, right? See, the fact is this: when we start criticizing those around us, we will never develop relationship. We will never have the opportunity to show them how much God loves them if all we're ever doing is criticizing them. And so today, that's kind of my challenge for you today, is to think about your relationships with people outside the church. How do you treat them? Right? How do you treat them? How do you converse with them? How do you talk with them? So this is where I'm going to leave you with today. And tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to switch gears a little bit, because we're going to see that Paul takes this teaching just a little bit further, all right? So until we meet again, may God bless you.